But I always have this proven pattern to tell you something from the past, the present, and then to the future. So this is the course I'm also taking in this case. So TYPO3 Flow 2.0 is around the corner after quite some work. I think, when was it, on Tuesday or something, we committed the last breaking feature or feature at all for Flow 2.0, and what's now following is just a few bug fixes. We'll go through the remaining bugs and see what's necessary for the 2.0. And that is really a major step for us, because you can imagine when you release a 1.0, the very first version, it still needs to be shown how will it behave in real world projects, because most people won't start using a product before the 1.0 release. And during the last year, we were in touch and involved in so many customer projects which were giving us feedback using TYPO3 Flow. So that they do the most crazy things, because it's an application framework. It's not just creating a website. They use it as a middleware for some iOS application, or they use it as a shop system. They use it for aggregating contract data, or they use it for a website which is mostly based on JavaScript and doing a few things on the Flow side. They use it for some high performance stuff. I've seen a custom CMS created on Flow. And so there are lots of things going on which deliver all the great feedback which we try to integrate into Flow, and I think the 2.0 version is really a very nice one. So we had that feature freeze already end of last year, theoretically. That was the plan, but we want to make sure that we don't have breaking changes every version again, because you also must be able to upgrade in a nice and easy way. So we decided to integrate a few last-minute features, which mostly were about improving the speed. So in total, in 2.0 compared to 1.1, we have 72 new bigger features and 177 bug fixes, lots of improvements, and that is just the Flow package alone. So of course all the other packages around also have been worked on pretty much. And just to mention the biggest features of Flow 2.0, we have the composer support. I don't know, who has already upgraded to 2.0 or tried it? Yeah. There are two things which are really a hassle upgrading, and that is, the one thing is we have a new package management, which means you need to migrate all your Git environment. When you use submodules, now you use Composer. And sometimes you think, like, was it really worth all this hassle? But Composer is doing a few very great things, especially during development, because the bigger these projects go or become, the more dependencies you have. And try to keep track of all these different versions which depend on that version, and then try upgrading. If you do that manually, that's really a big hassle. And the other advantage, of course, is that with packages.org we have this public repository with thousands of libraries we can use, and you can just install them into your Flow application and use them right away if they have proper quality and you know. But this is really great, because we can use a lot of libraries which are probably written for Symfony, or which are written for Zen Framework or other frameworks, and you want to have the opportunity to work on the fun part of the project, of course, which means the application logic, and not create yet another IMAP integration or Active Directory, whatnot. And so we can use all these libraries. Another nice feature we had as a side outcome of the single sign-on project, Christopher will demonstrate today, with native sessions in PHP. which means we are not using the built-in PHP sessions anymore, but have our own solution which is based on the cache framework. And that means you can push all your session data into anything which is supported by the caching framework, Redis or Memcache, CouchDB, PDO, whatever. And you can also manage these sessions, so to see who's logged in and look into the session data, etc. So that's quite a nice improvement. We also have minor things like you can have custom exception pages. So if you have a 404, for example, you can now just create a fluid template and display your own custom error messages, and that is configurable for any kind of exceptions or status codes. A pretty last-minute feature are the persisted roles. So in the security system, previously you only could define roles in your policy files. Now you can additionally create roles through some API in the database, in the persistence layer. That is very helpful if you create some user management with a user interface, like we need for Neos, for example. Then you can create new roles through that user interface. Well, the almost last feature, which we just merged this week, is support for safe request methods. And that will probably break quite some applications. And I don't tell that because I'm proud about it, but this is one of the things we talked about, I think, for 2 years already. It's according to the HTTP specification, GET requests, for example, should be read-only. They shouldn't change anything on the server side. So if you call a delete action, for example, you better don't do that with a GET request. And with this feature, we are supporting this policy, this paradigm, to have safe request methods, which means when you're running a GET request now in Flow, we will not automatically persist any changes. You can still do that manually if you really need to, but we don't persist that anymore. And at the same time, do you remember these CSRF tokens? Who had fun with CSRF tokens already? You know, these bugging get arguments, query arguments. That is much easier now. No URL which appears in a link needs to contain a CSRF token anymore, because when you use that with a GET request, it's safe, it can't do any harm. We only need to add these tokens for sending forms and other kinds of requests. That will simplify many things. For example, if you want to copy and paste the link and send it to someone, it doesn't contain this CSRF token anymore. All right. Then we had a performance code sprint in Kiel. And during that performance sprint, we could do a few amazing things to speed up flow, and one is lazy dependency injection. So if you have some action controller with, let's say, 15 actions and it needs 20 different services, it's pretty clear that not all of these actions need all of these services, but because everything depends on everything a bit, all these classes are loaded. So if you have lots of packages with lots of services, you load a lot of classes and never use them. And lazy dependency injection doesn't require you to change anything, it's just you get your dependencies injected. But they are only loaded once you start using them. So if you call a method the first time on the dependency, then the class is loaded. And this gives big performance improvements, especially with bigger projects. And a nice other idea Christopher had was static method compilation. So there are a few spots in the framework, but maybe also in your code, which relies on data which is kind of static. So for example, in the action controller we need a way to figure out which methods exist, which arguments do they have to prepare the validation. We do that programmatically because we don't want you to configure this a second time. We don't want you to repeat yourself and write an XML or YAML file with the configuration. But on the other hand, this whole data is static, so there's no need to do it on every request. And now it's possible to flag a method with an annotation, compile static, and it must be a static method. And this will only be called once during compile time, and then the result will be hard-coded in a file, and the method will actually not be executed again. So that helps optimizing a few important spots, and in essence it speeded up again the framework. So if you take these improvements, then now if you look at this welcome screen, which is part of Flow, as you know, this is an uncached page, which means Fluid is started, the template is parsed and everything. So for this uncached page on my machine, I have 26 milliseconds now as request time. And that's a big improvement if you compare that to Flow 1.1, where it was on my machine, again, rather 250 milliseconds. Yeah? Alright, so we had this performance sprint, and what I'd like to tell you a bit is who's doing that and why are we doing that, who's involved. So if you look at such a project like Flow, and Flow is since this year at least completely funded and done by all the volunteers who work on it. You could say they are not getting paid, but everything is always paid by someone. So it might be you take it from your piggy bank of time you spend with your family, or you have a really good customer project, so you can allow yourself to spend another week working on the open source project. So, but there are all these people behind it who spend a lot of time, and that is not just an evening, a day or something. It really comes about hundreds of hours in a few months. And it's important to support these people, and you always take a look at the features probably, and they are fortunately much easier to fund. So if I come up with a great new feature idea, I can go to some customer and try to sell it. And in that sense, Flow is really mature enough that it can completely survive on its own in terms of new features. We don't need funding for that, except some good customer projects. But there are still a lot more tasks to do. So if someone of you, for example, creates a feature or some patch, that needs to be reviewed. And it's a bit different working on your customer project or working on a framework, because the quality must be much higher, and the API must really be stable, because thousands of people are using it. So we really try to pay a lot of attention on the quality. And in that sense, there are lots of people doing reviews. So if things are not getting done as fast as you wish, then please don't complain. Try to help by creating nicer patch sets, or sending them a book or some coffee or whatever. And I personally consider each volunteer, every active contributor, a platinum sponsor of the project, because if you would count it in money, it would be a platinum sponsor in any case, of course. But try to imagine that, and that is not just the core team. There are lots more people involved now, and if you meet them, just try to think of them being a freelancer, but at the same time a platinum sponsor. So what can you do to support the project? Well, the first thing is, of course, using it. That is the best support you can do, and we had that last year with Flow. The pilot projects is always more difficult to do, of course, because there might be some features missing in the framework or some bugs you find. Now we have the same situation with NEOS. The first projects will also be a bit more hassle than projects in 3 years from now, very obviously. But the other thing you might consider is try supporting the people who make the product. And again, it's not only the core team, but anybody actively involved, try to give them good projects and try to not argue about their prices or whatever. Consider that as a sponsorship, yeah? And another thing we try to do is crowdfunding. So just this week I wrote a little blog post about the CSRF feature, and I said, yeah, you know, we need 2-3 days to do that. Maybe we can raise some funds. And in the end we had 850 euros during that day, just from that blog post we could use for creating that feature. The problem though is, unfortunately, half of these people are always the same people. These are the people who say, yeah, you know, I can't really afford it, but someone needs to do it. We really need to fund that. And it's sometimes, or it is hard accepting money from these guys, so we need to spread the word and try to motivate many more people. Especially this blog post, according to my analytics, has been, or the tweet has been read 12,000 times. Now imagine every one of them would just give 1 cent, that would solve the problem, of course. So, there are lots of motivated people behind it, and what I would like to share with you a bit is the spirit we have in our team. And that is nothing you plan for or you know try to organize, but over the years, this small team developed a certain spirit and set of core values we share. And recently we tried to put that into words and see what does that make, because for us it's so natural that we're working together in that mode. We meet every day, we have daily scrums, we are meeting on IRC the whole day. It's like we are working in the same office. And there are a few words you could mention in that respect. So one is humility, which is, for example, although I'm quite visible in the project, it's not that I'm so important. We just looked at who has knowledge about which part of Flow and Neos, and this project could perfectly run without me, or without Carsten, or without Sebastian, or you know, there are so many more people now who have their important knowledge, and most of us are motivated being part of this because we learn from each other. There are so clever people, and only we together can make this cool framework and this cool CMS. Nobody of us alone could do that. So it's not taking ourselves as too important and having respect for the work of each other. We argue a lot in the team, and it could very easily happen, or happened lots of times, that Sebastian would approach me and say, yeah, you know, your TypoScript implementation you spent all these months, I think that's shitty. Last night I created a completely new solution with Christopher, I think we'll go for that. And that might sound like not being respectful, but we have that idea that we want to create something great, and so we try to be respectful still with the kind of work, and consider that's sometimes not, but but anyway, we have as another value that trust. And what does that mean in practice? You can organize any company or project with a hierarchy and certain policies and rules you have. For example, I don't know, who works in a company with more than 10 employees? Okay, does every employee in your company have full access to any server and the bookkeeping? Probably not. So there was one impressive moment when we had a sprint in Lübeck. There was one guy from GitHub joining us, and they sponsored lunch for our sprint. And then he gave us a backstage tour through GitHub. And he's a support guy at GitHub. And then we saw, okay, and then she showed us the GitHub repository where GitHub is made, and we saw the button delete repository, transfer ownership. So he could actually do everything there. And so we asked him about it, and he said, yeah, you know, everybody has access to everything. It's all based on trust. You better not push the wrong button, and you better do the right thing. Because everything trying to, you know, figure out who needs to do what is so complicated that it's much better to trust each other. I like that principle. And this is what we also want to do in Flow and Neos. So everybody has access to the website or GitHub or whatever. We want to make sure that you think twice before merging it, and we don't restrict you from merging something to master, but because we trust you. And you can do mistakes once. And but the important bit, of course, that you're acting responsible and not think only about your, I need that for my project, I need to merge this now. Think about all these people who are using it, act responsibly, and then we can trust you. So these are a few core principles I really like about the team spirit we have, and which we would like to carry to the outside as well. And there might be many more values we have. And now we are a product, I think there are, in history currently in Flow there have been 70 different committers, and the team is about 15 to 20 people currently who works on Flow and Neos on a daily basis. So how to grow that, how to have more contributors. And we have something going on which is kind of mentoring, so if you're new and want to contribute, there will be one in the team taking care of showing or teaching you the ropes of Flow, how to circumvent our review system and everything. But that doesn't scale so much. And what scales much better is communicating values and our mission. Because certainly there are lots of diverse people, and we want to have diverse people in our project. But it's also important that we row into the right into the same direction, because otherwise nobody will feel at home in this project. But if we communicate that we have a certain sense of quality, that we, you know, do things this or that way, it's much easier for any contributor to do the right thing intuitively. Right. So that was about the spirit, and now I'm going to tell you about what we plan for the future in Flow. So if you followed the development of Flow during the last years and upgraded with any patch we submitted, that might have been quite some work. But now it's getting a bit much easier again, because we will follow the semantic versioning scheme, which means after the 2.0 we'll have the 2.1 release, which will be fully backwards compatible, and then we have a 2.2 which is also backwards compatible, as long as you use the public API, the official API. Always make sure if you use some code that there's an API annotation on it. So we're trying to stabilize things much more, but also we have new features, of course. And the big question is about the release schedule, when will the next version be released, etc. And we will choose a different release cycle than we currently have in TYPO3, and that is, we're focusing on a certain feature set and not on a certain release date. So that means now after the 2.0 release we sit together and discuss the next major features, and we'll have, I think this time we'll have 2 must-have major features, and only if they are implemented we can release 2.1, and we'll try to focus on getting them done. And then we have 2 or 3 more major can-have features which are already being developed, but they must not block the release. So there cannot be any code from these features in the code base which would block releasing of 2.1. So for Flow 2.1, we already have identified the features and already started with it. One of them is the resource management. It's a completely new resource management, but it's backwards compatible with the API. And that allows you to store any resources in cloud storages, publish it in content delivery networks. And that is already safe and funded, already started with. I'm not so sure about the second part. If we get some funding for it, we can also make that possible for 2.1. That is automatic minification and other post-processing filters for your resources. So you have your JavaScript files combined and CSS, etc. And the second big major feature will be even better REST support. So what we have there is support in the routing system for different request methods. So you can define a route which only is involved in post requests, etc. And we'll build in a few more features into the HTTP request response stuff, so you can look into arguments better, etc. So REST and resource management will be the major topics for 2.1. And if everything goes fine, then this can be released in June or something. June, July, that's what I expect. For Flow 2.2, which might follow 3 months later, we have a new built-in page cache, which we need for Neos as well, and a built-in reverse proxy, which you can use additionally to varnish or without varnish. So it will speed up your Flow application or Neos application if you're not using the reverse proxy. Another thing being worked on but still needs some support and funding is the multi-persistent support, so that you can define on a repository basis where this should be persisted in which kind of database. Right, so these are the plans we have, and you'll hear a lot more, of course, in the different talks about how to use all that. Now, why we are still being asked, why is Flow so necessary or different, or why not use Symfony, why not use Zen Framework? Why not use Zen Framework? That's easier to reply to. But and what you can see is that certainly framework is very necessary and important to have. It's great to have a great application server, application framework, but most customer projects need a website too, and they need a shop system too, and I think this is the great thing we have to offer. We have a framework which is tailored to be the foundation of a content management system, and Neos is really taking shape. There are lots of things still to solve in the user interface, but I can tell you I'm using Neos on a daily basis, and if you look at my blog, you can see that I'm writing much more blog posts than a few weeks ago, because it started to become so much fun to do that. It's really taking shape now, and I think that is really a killer combination. And then there are also some brave guys who are currently working on making Flow the basis of certain parts in TYPO3. So there's this effort going on to see what about TYPO3 7.0, what would happen if we could use Flow in certain parts, like for the plugin system. If we wouldn't have to use XBase, but we could have true Flow plugins. And if you see this all together, it's really taking shape, and then it makes sense again to have this TYPO3 family of products. The only thing missing maybe is a shop system, but Techdivision does shop systems, so maybe they can create one. But I really think that during this year and end of this year, you will see how this whole family of products belongs together, and that is a really good decision, of course, to use Flow for any kind of project now. So